Let's get our Bibles and let's go to the first book of the entire thing, the book of Genesis. Now, I'll tell you, we did the surveys and we tallied all the things, and I can go show you the totals. It was between this and the book of Isaiah, and Genesis won out by one vote. So we almost did Isaiah, but we're going to be in Genesis, and I don't think. And maybe you did. Maybe you knew exactly what we were about to get into, getting into the book of Genesis. But I don't know if you actually did know that both Genesis and Isaiah were going to be very long treks through very long books. The book of Genesis has a lot in it and a lot of chapters. And so the way I want to begin our time in the book of Genesis tonight is I want to just get your initial thoughts on, have you ever looked at the book of Genesis? What are some things you remember from it? What are some things that you feel about the book of Genesis? Before we get into what I'm going to talk about tonight, let me hear from you really quickly, Kathy. Okay, the beginning of the world. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of history, absolutely. What else, Ben? Okay, yep, it's the first prophecy of Jesus coming, and the seed of the woman who's going to crush the head of the serpent while also being dealt a crushing or mortal blow as well. Janice? Okay, Adam named the animals, right? He was given a job in the garden, yeah? What else? Yes. Yes. Elohim is the word for God. Well, I'm not going to give that away. It's a word for God. It's the word that's used of God in a lot of the book, but then there's also a switch to some other names as well. Yes, absolutely. What else? Noah's Ark. Yep, Noah's Ark's a part of this. Okay, it's the foundation. Well, you used the word I think. Did you use my word? Foundations. Did you see that on the front there? Foundations, that's the name of this study that we're going to be going through. It is the foundation for everything that comes after it. What were you saying, Priscilla? I'm sorry. Yeah, the first sin. Yeah, absolutely. Right, so when I actually think that Genesis it gets neglected a lot of times because I think that we like the more, I don't know what the right term is, the easier passages in the New Testament. And in fact, there are some people that would even say as a Christian we should just forget about the whole Old Testament altogether. And I'll tell you, that is a great and dangerous thing, right? It's a terrible and dangerous thing for us to forget, especially this book, but any of the Old Testament, because we cannot understand what happens in the New Testament without a proper understanding of what's going on in the Old. Right? The Old Testament is the foundation for this. You see, this book, the Bible, is one story. It's not multiple stories. It's one story. It's why we call it his story, history, right? It's his story, right? That's a Christian thing, right? It's one story. It's the story of God and this and what his creation, and then fall, and then how he redeems, and then how ultimately he's going to restore all things. This is one story. And so what we have here in the beginning of the book, Genesis, which by the way means in the beginning, it's literally just the first words of Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. That's the name of the book. It means beginning, right? Foundation. What we have in Genesis is the opening scenes of a story, a narrative that spans from the beginning of all things to now, really. And then even into the future. It is the story, and so what we have is the opening scenes here. And so what I love to talk about, I love good stories. One of my favorite stories that was ever written, and then they made movies about it, is the Lord of the Rings. I love the Lord of the Rings. You guys can, whatever, maybe you haven't seen them, maybe you have seen them. It's like my favorite. Okay, so when those movies came out, it's beautifully made movies. But if I were to tonight say, hey, we're going to watch the Lord of the Rings, and then I began with the second installment, what the way that begins, Peter, do you remember how the Two Towers begins? What's the opening scene, Ben, of the Two Towers? Yep. So what? But I'm going to use a little bit Cimmerillion, yes. But what is? Do you know how the opening scene in the Two Towers movie? Do you know what the opening scene is in the Two Towers movie? No. No. The second movie. It begins with. Yeah, there is an extended version. So the second movie begins with Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas running. The opening scene is just some dudes running. And so imagine I said, we're going to watch The Lord of the Rings, and I started showing you this. What's going to happen immediately? You're going to start having questions. You're going to be confused, like what's going on? Who are these people? Why are they running? It's like you're dropped right into the middle of a story. And so when we, I think, move very quickly to the New Testament, it's like we're being dropped right into the middle of a story. Mark, if you know how Mark's gospel begins, does anybody know how the Gospel of Mark begins? Somebody read the first verses of Mark. Somebody get there and read the first verses of Mark. Now, Mark is, I'll just tell you, I know we're not studying Mark, but this is all important. Okay, you can stop right there. Yeah, it'll go on to talk about John the Baptist. So if we just skip to Mark, what is it immediately, if I just read that, what will my questions be? Who's this guy, Isaiah? All right, and what is it? He prophesied something. So it's almost like we're coming into the middle of a story. And so for us to go back to the beginning and get some foundational truths about things is really going to open up for us. And we're even going to do that tonight. You're going to see how the authors of the Gospels believe that Jesus is a continuation of a story, and really the culmination of a story that began on the first pages of the Bible, in the beginning. And so before we get to the actual text tonight, I don't want to give a bunch of stuff here, right? Let's talk a little bit about the book itself. Let's talk about Genesis. Let's talk about how this study is going to go, because this is going to be a bit different than our Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount is very direct, right? It's very practical for the way that we live our lives. And I'm not saying that we're not going to be practical here on Wednesday nights, but what we're going to have here on Wednesday nights is more of a study rather than application. We may have application at times, but really as we study things, it's going to start to form something that we call a worldview. Okay, a worldview is the way in which we look at the world, the way in which we view why things are the way they are. And Genesis, for the Christian, is foundational for our worldview. It's foundational for how for us to ask questions like, is there something wrong with the world? And if there is something wrong with the world, how will it be fixed, or how is it getting fixed? Right? Everyone has a worldview, whether you know it or not. You have a worldview. You have a way in which you view the world. And there are certain questions that your worldview is going to have to answer. What is the meaning of all this? Right? Why are we here? Well, these are essential questions, and they are answered for us in the book of Genesis. And why we're here, and what all those things. And so we're going to get to that. But what I want to look at as we're talking about this foundational book is I want to call for a second, AAA, and that's what I'm going to call it, okay? And you can do this with any book. I came up with this today, and it's probably not original to me, but I tried to come up with it today, that every time you come to a new book, you should call AAA, okay? And what do I mean by that? We should call and find out who's the author, who's the audience, all right, so who is the book written by, who's the book written to, and then finally, my final A is, what's the arrangement of the book? The idea here really is are there any things that any markers that we should be looking for as far as the author that kind of indicate to us maybe a flow of thought, maybe, so like for instance, when we studied the Sermon on the Mount, what did we do? We looked at the context of Mark, and we said Mark wrote this so that people would believe in Jesus. We talked about who Mark was, and then we talked about how the sermon fit into the bigger picture of the book. So let's ask these questions and try to answer them. Now, let's read the first couple of verses, because in the New Testament, typically, when you read a letter or you read something in the New Testament, the first few verses give you an idea of maybe who wrote it. A lot of times the author of the thing will say, it's me, Paul, right? It's me, Mark, right? It's me, John, writing this to you. So let's read the first two verses, the verses that we're going to look at tonight, and let's see if we get any indication of who wrote this book, and maybe even the audience to whom this person is writing. God's word says this: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, do we get any indication of who wrote this from those two verses? No. So, I have to ask the question, who wrote the book of Genesis? Okay, Moses. Why do we believe Moses wrote the book of Genesis? Because he wrote the Pentateuch? Okay. Now, is there anywhere in the Bible that indicates that Moses wrote these books? Like, can we look at the rest of the Pentateuch and see? Because indeed, in fact, if you read the end of Deuteronomy, there are parts that happen after Moses' death. So who wrote those? Did Moses write those saying, oh, I know I'm going to die, and then I know I know what's going to happen after my death, right? Maybe. Listen, I'm just pushing in, because here's the thing. We have to know why we believe what we believe. We have to know why we say that Moses is the author. Because there's a theory about who wrote the book of Genesis, and actually, in fact, who wrote all of the Pentateuch. And it's not Moses. This is a theory. It became popular in the late 1800s. It can be talked about by these different letters. JDP. I should have written this down, and I did not write it down. I should have. But just for basically what they say is there are 4 different authors of the book, and that at different times you're going to see different people writing different things at different periods. All right, so each of these, like, this is a Deuteronomy, a priest, and this is like Judah, like, exile, is the other one. I figured it out, exile. And so this is a theory that was brought about when people started, like, trying to pick apart the Bible and say, okay, let's look at the Bible and try to come up with who wrote this, not from tradition, right? Because here's what's true. Tradition states that Moses wrote the Pentateuch. And tradition states that Moses wrote all of the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Penta means 5. And then the last few chapters, that Joshua wrote those last few chapters. All right, that's what church tradition says. And so these guys are like, well, let's look at, in honest, and trying to be honest with it, said, hey, let's look at and really see if we can get any clues from the actual text as to who's writing. And they came up with this theory that there were actually 4 authors, and they wrote at 4 different time periods. And so if this theory is true, the audience is varied. There's a different audience for each one of the writings, and then you have to go through and look, hey, based on the different words that are used, the different things that are used, who actually wrote it. Now, why do I tell you this? So that you know that this isn't a theory out here. Do I believe this theory is true? Absolutely not. It's a lie, I think, that's trying to undermine what the Bible is saying. And so, who wrote the book of Genesis? It wasn't four dudes over a period of time. Who wrote? Okay, so we have God as kind of the author. Okay. Ben? So if we look at the book of Exodus, we can see that part of these books were given to Moses by God. And so here we are in the first passage. We don't have any other passages that have been written. We don't have anything else in the Bible. We haven't looked forward to 2 Timothy 3:16. We haven't looked at 1 Peter 1:21. We haven't looked at any of those verses. And what we're coming to is that this book is in some way given by God. That God is its primary author. Because he's the one that gave most of it to Moses. And so here's what I'm going to say, and this is just purely opinion. We can't know for sure, and one day when we get to heaven, we can ask God, or when God brings heaven down, really, because that's the end of the story. When God brings heaven down, we can ask God, hey, who actually wrote these? And I think he's going to be like, well, it was inspired by me because I inspired the whole thing, right? And really all the writing was as I inspired it. But I believe, and this is just my opinion, that this is not true, but that Moses indeed is the author, and that he's writing to people who are trying to get into the promised land. So this is after they had gone into Egypt, and after they had escaped from Egypt. And so the audience here is Israel, the people of Israel, who are headed to the promised land. Why is it important for us to know who the author is and who he's writing to? Why is that important? Why is that important for any book? Mm-hmm. Yes. Love it. Yeah, so here's why I believe Moses wrote it. Because Jesus and the New Testament authors believe that the Pentateuch was written by Moses. Not just the church, not just tradition. Jesus himself quotes multiple times from the law, from different parts of the Pentateuch, and they believe that Moses was the one that wrote it. Okay, and so for me, I'm going to take Jesus' word over some dudes in the late 1800s word. Okay, just be honest. When was this written? Well, if this is true, this was like 3,000 years ago. All right, over 3,000 years ago. So a long time ago, okay? In a galaxy far, far away, no. A long time ago here on Earth, okay? All right, so then let's talk quickly about, is there anything that we can notice from the book? Maybe you were able to read through or you didn't know. Maybe you've read it before. Are there any markers in the book that would indicate any type of arrangement, any type of structure, right? A literary structure. That might clue us into what this book is all about. Okay, so I read John 1:1, and we know that there's very similar language there. Yep, we'll get to that. Don't jump ahead of me. So numbers are very important in the Bible, okay? So we see that there are seven. Seven is a pattern in the first chapter, okay? There are 7 days, right? There are, if you can read the original language here, there are actually 7 words in the first verse, in that first opening sentence. There are 3 sets of 7s in the explanation, and then we see God saying 7 times here. He speaks 7 times in this chapter. Then there's another number that's important, and that is the number 10. If you are to read through the book of Genesis, the 10 has this idea of not perfection, but completion, wholeness, all right? And so there's a phrase that is repeated 10 times in the book that is going to give us a huge clue as to what exactly is going on in the book. Does anybody know what this repeated phrase is? An account of? Close? No, not in God. An account of what verse? Point to a verse in a chapter and a verse for me. Find it in the text, because I'm telling you that this is repeated 10 times. There's a text that you can go to, or 10 different verses you can go to and find this exact phrase, because that might be a translation of what I'm trying to get at. God said, that's repeated. Again, it is good, is in the first chapter, but we're talking about the whole book here. We're talking about literary structure of the whole book. Right? We've zoomed out and we're trying to figure out who's the author, who's the audience. Is there a way that this is arranged? What's the kind of outline structure of the book? Okay, what verse are you pointing at? Okay. What does chapter 2, verse 4 say in your version? Okay, account. So it was account in some translations. That's a bad translation. Okay, I'm just going to, sorry, it just is, of the Hebrew word. Somebody else read that verse, chapter 2, verse 4, in a different version. King James, ESV, most of the, not that your translation's a bad translation, okay? I don't want to say your translation's a bad translation. Most of the translations are going to have the idea of the generations. This is a word in the original language that I'm gonna use a lot in this study. And the reason I'm going to use it a lot is because it is the main structure, the main arranging factor in the book of Genesis. And I'm going to use this word. It's the anglicized version of it, but it's toledot. That is the original language, and that is this word. These are the generations, or generations, okay? Or this is the account, huh? Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. So account, or so this is said 10 times, and every single time it marks kind of this next step, right? And we see that happening multiple times. If you just flip with me, just for the sake of showing you this, look at the beginning of chapter 5. Right, this is the book of the generations of Adam, right? We see at the beginning of chapter 6, verse 9, these are the generations of, it's the same word. It's the same word. Account might be a way it's used in other places, but you can flip through and see multiple times that talks about generations. If we keep going here, another kind of part that is a separating part is chapter 11, verse 27, chapter 10, verse 1, right? These are the generations of, these are the generations of, these are the generations of. All right, so those of us who are history nerds, Judy, this book is literally a book about genealogies. That's the book. It's the accounts or the genealogies of people. Why are genealogies important to the Jewish person? Well, they're important because the book of Genesis puts huge emphasis on the book, on the genealogies. And it is, in fact, the arranging factor of the book. But let me ask another question. Why are generations so important to the book of Genesis specifically? To what Moses was trying to say to the people of Israel as they're in Moab, as they're in the desert wanderings, going to the promised land. Why is it important, the generations, the genealogies? It's going to the lineage? Who what? Okay. Yes. But that we don't have that in 3,000 years ago. If I'm Israel and I'm walking around like, okay, I want to go to the promised land and I need some confidence maybe to that the promised land is something that I should be going to, or I don't want to go back to Egypt, how would genealogies help me? Right? So that I know who my dad was? Right, great, okay, whatever, right? Most of us, maybe you did that whole, whatever, you sent your spit off to something and try to figure out what part you are. And then, guess what? It got stolen because, anyway, that's a fraud thing. Anyway, but yeah, maybe you did that, or maybe you look back in your history and try to see who you were related to, right? And we get interested in that for a second, but then we're like, actually, nah, that's whatever. Okay. Yes. Right. Yes. And how he was faithful in the past so that he will be faithful in the future? Absolutely. I think all of that is true. But I think it goes back to something even deeper, and it's a question that we're going to come to in chapter 3. Chapter 3, verse 15 says something very important. Does anybody know what chapter 3, verse 15 is? Without looking at it. So chapter 3, verse 15, if you just really quickly look, creation, Adam and Eve fall, they eat the fruit, the serpent's there, they start blame shifting. Hey, it's her fault, his fault. It's this woman you gave me, it's that serpent, and then he's going to curse the serpent. And in the middle of that curse, chapter 3, verse 15 says something very important, and the New Testament authors pick up on this, specifically Paul picks up on this idea here, and this really is an important verse. What does it say? Somebody read it for us. Okay, and so, why is that verse important to generations or genealogies? Yes. Right. From us, there's going to come a guy, and this dude is going to defeat the thing that caused suffering, that caused pain, that caused all the stuff, all the hurt, for all people, right? Not just for us, not just our suffering, but for all people. And so I'm going to continue on because who is that seed going to be? And so the question of the entire book of Genesis is, who is the seed? And so we get to generations, and it says, here's the generations of Adam and Eve, and this is what happened. Well, they fell, and then it's like, these are the generations of the next person. And they fell, and they were awful. And here's the generations of the next person, and he was terrible. And then, like Noah, right? He was terrible, right? In fact, he screwed up in a garden as well. We'll get there, okay? He messed up in a garden with some fruit, right? Fermented fruit, but still messed up with some fruit, right? So Noah, awful, right? These are the generations of a dude who, man, he was not that far removed from us. Abraham, and we all look up to him. He was a screwed up dude. Oh, here's maybe it's Isaac. Oh, he's messed up. Oh, well, maybe it's Jacob, who is literally renamed to Israel. No, he's super messed up. Well, maybe it's Joseph. No, it can't be him because he's messed up as well, right? Even though there's a lot of positive things said about him. So the question that comes in the book of Genesis is, who is the seed? And it's going to give us this way of structuring the book to help us to understand what would have been in the mind of the original audience. All right, so let's get now to the actual text. Before we do that, does anybody know what language the book of Genesis is written in? It's written in Hebrew. Thank you, Danny. It is written in Hebrew. Now, do I have a brave volunteer who'd like to come and do something? Peter, come on up here. All right, this is my Hebrew Bible. All right, it's not very worn because I don't know Hebrew quite as well as I know Greek, okay? So I'm just going to be very honest with you. I'm going to hand it to you, okay? I want you to open to Genesis, to the book of Genesis. Listen, and I'm not, just so you know, there are English headings in this book. Wait, why are you going that way? He may have figured it out. Did you find the book of Genesis? Okay. He did. Thank you, Peter. You can take a seat. Let's give him a hand if you guys don't mind. Good job. It was doomed to fail unless you know that Hebrew is written not left to right, but right to left. And so you have to start not on this side, but on this side. And Genesis is at the beginning. I'm going to get there, hopefully, before you get all those things. Yes. And so you can see, right, I wasn't trying to trick him completely. What does that say? Does it say Genesis at the top, right, in English? Yeah. Like, I know there's a bunch of markings, right, Genesis. You can see that, right? So it's written backwards to the way that we would look at it. And so when we look at this, when we're going to be looking at some Hebrew, and I'm going to look at some Hebrew because I think original languages are very important to study God's word. We're going to be writing words, and you have to remember that they're going to be backwards, okay? And you're going to have to remember that it's a little bit of a different language, it's a little bit of a more difficult language, more symbolic. So here's, as we approach the passage that we've already read this evening. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. I want us to keep in the back of our mind the AAA. Moses wrote this to the people of Israel. The original was the people of Israel who are struggling, and they are looking, and they have a very different framework for how the world works and a very different framework for things, right? And as we keep that in the back of our mind, it's really going to color the way that we come to Genesis, because Genesis is a very controversial book. And a lot of times what we do as Christians is we take all of these questions, right? A question of like, what is the origin of the world? Or what is evolution true? Or how did all this stuff come to be? Or what is the definition of marriage? Or what is all these things? And we bring all of our questions, and we come to Genesis and we say, here are all the answers. And that is the wrong way to read the book of Genesis. The wrong way to read the book of Genesis is to take all these questions and say, let's superimpose them on the text and then try to get the answers out. Because if we're going to be honest, if we keep in mind who this is written to and who it was written by, let's read again, and here's what I want you to do. I want you to close your eyes as I read these first two verses, and I want you to use your imagination. And I want you to envision what Moses is talking about. All right? Close your eyes and envision what Moses is talking about. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, And darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. All right, now I want you to open your eyes. What did you picture? What was the picture that came in your mind as I was reading? Somebody share, come on. Okay, there was darkness. Okay, there was a reflection probably. So waters. Okay, so there's underwater, so maybe underwater, okay. Okay, so you pictured some kind of formless thing and something moving, okay. What else do we picture? Emptiness, okay. Okay, he was hovering. There was a spirit, which, by the way, just take your hand and put it in front of your face and say hello, hello. Did you feel that? All right, that was your breath, okay? Is the breath real? Yes. You know this, that in the Hebrew, ruach, the word for breath, spirit, they're the same word. Wind, it's all the same word. Okay, so this is something that is not seen, probably, okay? But it is the Spirit of God, right? It is God and His Spirit, okay? What else do we envision? Let's just read the first verse again. Close your eyes and let's just read the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. All right, now open your eyes. What did you envision? What did God create? Okay, so you saw stars. What else did we see? All right, so we saw a globe. All right. And tons of planets all over here. Probably a sun, right? Stars everywhere. Okay. There's mighty hands creating things. All right, and so when you imagine the globe of the earth, what did you imagine in the second? Now that we've got this picture, what does the second verse, how does that color what we see here? All right. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Now, what did you imagine there? All right, so this is like Jell-O, right? This is like Jell-O, okay? Great. Awesome. I'm glad we all envisioned that. Now, here's the thing. This is a 21st century reading of something that was written 3,000 years ago. Because guess what? Do you remember when some of you might know, do you know when the first picture of the earth as being a round globe came into being? It was not until the 60s. We didn't know that the earth was not flat, and well, some people don't still believe that, okay, whatever. We didn't know that the earth was not flat until well into the Enlightenment, right? It's what ended up causing Columbus and all those people to sail, right? They were like, okay, we started to believe, that's when the theory started coming about, that we believe that the earth is actually a round thing, not a flat thing where we're going to sail off the edge, okay? Because that's what they believed for a long time. All right, so now, with all of that in our head, what do we envision then when I read this verse again? Because we think of earth, when you think of earth, you think of this round globe. But that's not what would have come to the Hebrew mind as they were reading this. What would have come to their mind? Let's read it again. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. What would have come to their mind? All right, let me read it, and let me read it again, but let me retranslate those Hebrew words for you, because they're the same meaning, okay? They can mean, words can mean different things, okay? These words can mean a different thing. Let me retranslate. Ready? In the beginning, God created the sky and the land. Now, how does that change what we say? Okay, really what we're saying is God created what we're seeing here, right? What would be our experience, our lived experience. Not that zoomed out picture, that God created what we see, okay? Now, before you fire me, okay? When we take our questions and we put them onto the text, then we can get in trouble, because what is happening here is this should actually bring us to more questions. What can we actually say from this passage? It's not answering a question of how. It's setting a scene. Remember, this is a story that is being told to the Israelites. It's being written down. Is it historical? Yes. So what can we actually glean? What can we actually take away from this passage about creation, about the beginning, right? Because this phrase, in the beginning, just has the idea of a really long time ago, really outside of time, forever ago. There's not a descript time, right? Because he could have said at such and such a date, 3,000 years BC, or this day or that day, right? And then we would all be like, wonderful, now we can just say exactly when the earth was created because we have a date and a time. But that's not what he's trying to say. In fact, this phrase in the Hebrew has the idea of kind of this indescribable, kind of a time a long time ago, like literally how Star Wars begins out, a long time ago. That's kind of how this is. It's got idea of outside of time. God then created. So what can we take away from this passage about God and about creation that this is actually teaching? Forever ago, whenever that was, outside of time, there was not matter, there was not nothing, right? Because that's what a lot of theories are going to say. There was matter or there was nothing. No, there was something, and that something was God. In the beginning, long time ago, before all of this, God, right? In the beginning, God. And God did something. He did something that this word is not ascribed to anyone else. He created. Okay, so there's two things that we can say about creation for certain. That God, and about God. First, God is eternal. He always was, he always will be, and he always is, right? He is right now, he was before, and he always will be. Can't understand that one, okay? Because he's God. And if I could understand that he was forever and always is and always was, then I would be God. And I'm not God, okay? He is God. And so he has always existed. It's what makes him God. He's outside of time. In fact, if time were aligned and we said creation's here and Adam and Eve are here and the cross is here and we're here, he's like standing outside of that. He's above time. And we're going to see when we get to the days of creation that what he's creating is he's actually taking order putting order into the thing that he creates by creating time. He creates time itself, which is an ordering of creation, okay? So in the beginning, we can say that God was eternal, and then we can say that God created, and this word in the Hebrew has this idea of creating with no pre-existing materials. We can't create without having something else that is, we're melding into this thing, right? We can say, right, just imagine I had the Mona Lisa, I stole it, okay, and it's here, right? Someone created that, but they had to take paint, right, and they had to paint it. And you can argue all the things about it, but they had to paint it, right? They had to create on a canvas. They didn't say, okay, I'm going to speak, and then all of a sudden, boom, here's a canvas, and here's the Mona Lisa. No, that's not how it works, right? Any song, anything that we say that we create, ideas, speeches, right? The very thing I'm saying right now, I studied for several hours to get to the point where I can teach you. I didn't create these thoughts. These thoughts are thoughts that other people had that I'm now disseminating to you, okay? The only being that can create And this is there's a Latin phrase that catches this really well, right? So there's two things that we can take from the first verse of the Bible, that God is eternal. Ooh, we're going to make that into an R. And that God created. And here's the Latin phrase, ex nihilo. He created out of nothing. Okay? We can say that from this. But there's not anything else that we can say. We can't say when God created. We can't say even the method by which God created, the hows, because that's actually not what Genesis is trying to answer at all. This passage is not trying to answer the hows. Because here's the thing about God creating out of nothing. It was a supernatural event. And so when we come to it with our scientific mind and trying to say, hey, we have to scientifically figure out, right, how things are, we can't, because God did something that we can't explain and we couldn't observe, and it's not repeatable. Okay? So we can say with some certainty, if we believe these two things, the theory of evolution doesn't work, because that begins with nothing, everything out of nothing. We can't go with the myths of like every other religion, because there's some kind of primordial pre-existent matter that everything's created out of. Because in the beginning there was nothing but God. And into that nothing, God spoke everything. And when he created initially, it was, look at it. Verse 2. The earth was without form and void. That is a phrase that is actually a really fun phrase. It's one of the first phrases I learned in Hebrew because it's a fun phrase. It's tohu vavohu, right? And you can see the symmetry there. That's the idea. It's vav is the word and in Hebrew, and it literally means formless or empty and like a wasteland. It was like a wild wasteland. There was nothing. It was just, there was nothing there. There was nothing but disorder and chaos. And in that chaos, in that darkness, the Spirit of God, there was a darkness there. The Spirit of God was there. And he was hovering over the face of this chaos, because guess what? There's another thing in the Old Testament that's over and again, that waters have this idea of chaos. Guess what? We're not supposed to live in the water. In it, right? It's not very good for us. I can't build my house in the water, right? Maybe I can try, but that's not a habitable environment for us. Right? I'm not going to build my house on the ocean floor because I can't breathe that, right? And there's just chaos and some creature might get me, right? That, in the Old Testament, right, this idea of waters have this idea of just this chaotic thing. But in that chaos, we have God. God is there in the midst of that darkness. And he's going to speak. And by his word, he is going to bring order into that chaos. He's going to bring order, and he's going to bring everything out of nothing. He's going to create into that with his word. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to break down what kind of order he brings to all of that. But here's what's true tonight. The word by which he spoke, we've already read the passage by which he creates all things by his word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Notice, John 1 starts the same way that the book of Genesis starts. And it says that the Word that God spoke was actually Jesus. And if you didn't believe him, right? If you didn't say, hey, maybe he's just being really cute with his words, and he was just really, came up with this really cool thing. He says, the Word was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. You see, God, Jesus, who this is, by the way, verse 14 reveals that to us, that this Word became flesh and dwelt among us, right? He was the Word by which God created all things. On the first pages of the Bible, we have this kind of this pregnant expression of God that doesn't get explained, right? Us. Let's make man in our image. It's like he's talking to people. And we have the Spirit of God, but we also have God, right? So what is happening here? And we know from the New Testament that this is the Trinity and that God created by Jesus. But notice where he goes next in John. In him, that is Jesus, was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. What did God create on the first day? He created light. Why? Because he was bringing order into our chaos. And this is what Jesus does for us. He speaks order into our chaos. He takes on our darkness, and that darkness cannot overcome him. That darkness cannot overcome him. He took on the cross, all of our darkness and put our lives into order. The order that was supposed to be here, right, when God created all things and he called them all good, 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 good. That's how our life is supposed to be. But God, we got separated, and so Jesus had to come and do he's the only one that can create. And he created out of our nothingness, out of our emptiness, out of our darkness, everything. He made us new creatures. And so we should live as such. Right? And so we see, right, this study through the book of Genesis is going to give us some foundational truths that we're going to take with us into the New Testament that's going to explain to us the salvific work of Jesus on the cross. It's going to give us a new coloring, a new flavoring for it. But notice, he's just simply setting the scene for what's going to come next. Because he has to get to eventually Adam being made in the image of God. And we're going to talk about what that means. But then he has to get to the fall, and he has to get then to that proto-evangelium, that's what we call it, Genesis 3:15. He has to predict that Jesus is going to come, and then we have to ask the question, who's the seed, who's the seed? And guess what? That's the entire Old Testament. Who's that seed? And then Matthew's gospel begins, these are the generations of Jesus? What? What? Now we have the answer. It's him. It's Jesus. He's the one who is the seed, who's going to make all things right. He is God who's going to set into that disorder and darkness and chaos order and good things. This is our good God who we serve. We should walk away from here with a greater appreciation for what Jesus has done for us because he created in the beginning. But in the beginning of our life, for Jesus, he created us as new creatures. Let's pray. Father, I thank you that you're a God who creates and that you put into each of us, God, an emptiness, a longing, a desire, a chaos that we try to fix on our own, but we can't. We need you to come into that darkness, to that chaos, and we need you to speak light and to speak life. And the way that you do that is by the word, Jesus. And so, God, even if we're not feeling it right now, even if we're not like, what's going on? Like, I don't feel like I'm hearing from you at all, God. I don't even know if you're a part of my life, and there's just darkness and chaos, and we feel alone out in left field, like there's nothing going on, God. Help us to remember that you have spoken through your word, and that word died for us. Help us to be a people who live as new creations. The old has passed away. Behold, we have become new. Thank you for the grace that we find in Jesus. Thank you for his life, for the light that shines in the darkness and that no darkness can overcome. Help us as we go out into a dark world that has people who have nothing but chaos and darkness and emptiness in their life and need you to speak light and life into them. Help us to be the light of the world, to shine before men, so that many more can come to know you. Be gracious to us. Keep us safe as we go home. Bring us back at the next appointed time. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, interesting study. We're going to get there.